Okay, and we are live, and I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes here for people to log on, get a few eyeballs on here, and then we'll get rolling. In the second half, we are going to do reverse Q&A, where I ask the audience questions and get their feedback on world events. I'm pretty excited about this, actually. So I'm going to do quite a long talk today. And so in the second half, I'm going to try and keep things short. I would like to try and keep everything tonight to an hour and a half. That's what I'm shooting for. And then, I have a ton to cover. So I'm just going to jump right into things. So one of the things that's been kind of, bumbling about in my head recently is this fact that the oldest intelligence agency in the United States is the Office of Naval Intelligence. It seems that the Navy has for many years now had anti-gravity, perhaps. There's some recent documents about that, but definitely cold fusion. There's stuff about the Navy having had cold fusion for about a decade now. And they used a palladium lattice, just like Fleischmann and Pons did back in the late 80s, early 90s, when they had that supposed breakthrough that then we were told, oh, no, definitely that was not a real breakthrough. And it seems like the problem with it was that you just have to have a very high-quality palladium lattice, and then it is more consistent. And the problem was when they tried to replicate the experiment, Fleischmann and Pons had a particularly pristine palladium lattice they were working with. And then later palladium lattices were much, much worse. But if you type in palladium, lattice, cold fusion, Navy, it'll pop up that the Navy has had, it seems, cold fusion or the principal technology behind it for about a decade, maybe a little bit longer. And that's them announcing it, which implies that it could be much older still. Now, the Office of Naval Intelligence is fascinating because they actually started as something called the Nablus Ring. And the Nablus Ring was the intelligence agency basically for the Revolutionary People's Army, right? Like under George Washington and so forth. And the Nablus Ring over time evolved into the Office of Naval Intelligence, which was the first intelligence agency in the United States by basically like 100 years before the next intelligence agency, maybe 120 years, something insane, before the next intelligence agency would come into existence. I also think it's interesting that it existed in its proto form as the Nablus Ring, literally at the time of the Founding Fathers. And I forget the name of the guy, but the first spy, he ended up getting executed by the British for treason. And he said famously, I regret that I have but one life to give for my country. So why am I bringing up ONI? Well, it's interesting because I've said for a while now that I believe that Kennedy, right, JFK, who I am not going to co-sign on the Pascal Najati lunatic fringe, 107-year-old JFK was the 17th letter of the alphabet, right? The first letter in the word queen. Like, what? That's crazy. But JFK was in the Navy during World War II. Could JFK have been an ONI asset? Now, JFK was going to destroy the CIA. So he said, break it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Is it possible that JFK represented an ONI faction that then that was nationalist in character, that then watched as the CIA killed their guy? That would explain why there was a definitive reaction to, we got to get to the bottom of who did this and we got to figure out how to fight them. Therein is the milieu from, so some people say, like Cliff High, the milieu in which the program that would become known as the 17th letter of the alphabet in modern times, whatever the pro-American patriot nationalist movement that seems to have come out of the Pentagon around the time of the JFK assassination, now you start tying it all together, especially when you consider a couple of things. If the Navy, and by extension the Office of Naval Intelligence, is overseeing anti-grav and cold fusion, and you see things like the Tic Tac incident with the Nimitz, right? that again it's that same milieu. There's a lot of information about it. What's his name who was before Alex Jones? William Cooper had been a member of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and William Cooper was pretty, he certainly aspired to be a B most high, but all the stuff in his book is very like a sort of Luciferian analysis of the Molochians' plans, right? And he was right about so many things way ahead of time. Again, Office of Naval Intelligence. Do people really leave? Interesting, because he gets killed by the police not long after 9/11. Then you have this connection with JFK and the Navy. And finally, you have the fact that now imagine that you wanted to go around to all the ancient civilizations that existed before the current civilization, right? Like since the Younger Dryas impact, for example, the most classic being Atlantis, right? The Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Who has the technology in the world to find all the ruins that are underwater? What group 100% has that? Office of Naval Intelligence and the Navy, right? What group would understand admiralty law? Because they have to operate under it a huge amount of the time. They'd understand admiralty law and why the basically coup in 1876 that brought about the corporation of the United States, that so many in the milieu around Trump and the 17th letter of the alphabet thing, right? Like Dr. Jan Helper Hayes talked about this a lot. There's definitely something to that we were reincorporated and that then it became a crown-owned corporation because we apparently owed the British a lot of money at the end of the Civil War as part of why that happened. So when you start to think about who has access to the ocean floor, who understands admiralty laws and operates under them, who patrols the world's oceans and therefore keeps all the maritime trade going, which is incredibly important. And so you could argue it's the most important branch of the military for that reason alone. Who has the oldest intelligence agency? Who has there been solid information showing that they at least have cold fusion? And recently there were those documents released that someone in the comments on this channel mentioned, and I can't remember them off the top of my head. If Brent, if you're out there listening to this, if you could drop the name of that is, or whoever it was who originally turned me on to those Navy documents that have that information around anti-gravity as well. I mean, that's just huge. So what if the Office of Naval Intelligence is the center of the old Luciferian power, right? If you are still haven't really branched out into space to a sufficient degree, or you're not willing to recognize that you've branched out into space, it makes sense to me that a lot of this stuff would happen within the Navy. If you remember that hacker, the British hacker from the early part of the 21st century, I can't remember his name right now, but he hacked into NASA servers, and what he found was lists of ships and lists of the people who were on those ships, and it was under the Navy. It was under the Navy. I can't think of that guy. If anyone can think of the British hacker from the early part of the 20th century, weirdly, the British government resisted sending him to us. His name is right in the tip of my tongue. It's driving me nuts. Anyways, when that guy hacked into NASA, he pulled all those lists of ships and personnel on those ships from that. Oh, it's driving me nuts. I can't think of this guy's name. But yeah, he was in there for like 15 minutes and he was on an old dial-up modem or some nonsense. He did this in the late 90s or early 2000s. I want to say it's McKinnon, maybe is his name. And that again was under Navy. So it seems the locus of power, at least the outer locus of power for the Luciferian springing out of the Pentagon, this movement, right? That is patriotic and nationalist in character, though I think with global aspirations of its own that are just different and diametrically opposed to the Molochian power structures that they're trying to create with the WTF and all that stuff. But they're at least rallying the troops around the narrative of patriotism and nationalism, which may or may not be true. I just think it's very interesting if you start to look at the past 60 years, but especially the past, say, 8 years, as a conflict between the NSA, Office of Naval Intelligence, and the very recent on the field Space Force, basically versus the CIA and the old European power structures. So a nationalist NSA, a nationalist Office of Naval Intelligence, and elements of the Pentagon versus this globalist Molochian old European power establishment. I think it's worth keeping your eye on that and paying attention to things about the Navy and doing some digging and research around the Navy, because the more I've started to sit with this JFK as a ONI asset, which I thought of the other day that, wow, he was in the Navy. And then just a couple of days later, someone on the podcast said it. And I was like, oh my God, yes. I just think that that's a very interesting nexus to look at when we're doing this analysis of these, the very well hidden Luciferian group and the much more obvious Molochian group. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to take a sip. I'm actually going to double fist sip. A very interesting and hilarious thing happened this week that looks to me like internecine power elite struggles and signaling. So Netanyahu and the head of Hamas both had an international criminal court arrest warrant and issued for them. So both the head of Hamas and Netanyahu both had arrest warrants for crimes against humanity and or war crimes in the case of Netanyahu. I think actually both October 7th was also considered a war crime, although it seems like that's more of a terrorist attack, which is slightly different, but both abominable. So Netanyahu's response this week was interesting. He said, arresting me after what happened on October 7th, as though it wasn't the response to October 7th that people were talking about. He said, arresting me after that is like arresting George W. Bush for 9/11. What was that, baby? I said it would be like arresting my co-conspirator 9/11, George W. Bush. I'm kidding, of course, but also kind of not. Although I looked it up, and actually Bibi was in the milieu surrounding the locus of power for 30 years now. He's been near the prime ministership or was the prime minister of Israel for basically the past 30 years. But he wasn't actually the prime minister when 9/11 happened. But of course, you can look up dancing people in 9/11 and some very interesting stuff comes up. So that looked to me like he was saying, hey guys, I know where the bodies are buried, and I'm not afraid to maybe go public if you guys keep putting pressure on me, because there's some kind of conflict between the main European American locus of power and now Israel. What seemed like an ironclad alliance is suddenly falling apart. And that's the NATO, old European power, American alliance with Israel. Now, if you look into what Peter Zeihan is saying, Peter Zeihan had a very interesting video a few months ago where he said Israel and Iran or a what the fuck moment in the Middle East. And he started talking about how this dock, which just became untethered today and drifted to the shore, sabotage much, that this dock was part of a plan by the Biden administration to anger the Israelis with an American military presence, boots on the ground in Gaza, which they consider to be boots on the ground in Israel, right? They don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. That's their land in their opinion. So if the U.S. puts boots on the ground in there, it really complicates this whole cleaning out Palestine of human beings and innocents and killing them all, right? But from their point of view, clearing the land of the people who are there so they can do a lot of building. There's a bunch of building projects that are already ready to go. People are already trading some of this apparently, because it's some of that Gaza or some of the Gaza stuff is just like beautiful coastal property if you built it up properly. So there's already been reports of wealthy people buying into future properties that are there in what's left of Palestine. Kind of crazy. And so you have this situation where a few months ago, Yuval Noah Harari, who's clearly part of the WEF cabal, and I was actually talking with a friend of mine, and he was like, man, I really loved Yuval Noah Harari like 15 years ago. He was really great. He seemed to be warning against AI and all this other kind of stuff. And then he just completely 180'd. And it reminds me of that thing I brought up in another episode where Himmler talked about, or not Himmler, gosh, what is that guy's name? It's driving me nuts. Rudolf Hess, when he was at the Nuremberg trials, he talked about mind control, right? And like people suddenly doing 180s against what they had talked about previously. And Yuval Noah Harari is just like that. Is he under mind control? Is it a clone? Is it an actor replacing him? I just saw someone talking about Dave Chappelle perhaps not being the same person, and that he might have been replaced. Jim Brewer was kind of speculating about that, and that's weird because Jim Brewer is his friend. It's certainly been happening here and there where people are being replaced by what appear like doubles. I don't know if they're clones. That's a popular theory. That would, if there's anti-gravity and cold fusion, could there also be cloning? Yes. That seems more complicated to me than anti-gravity or cold fusion, which is more simply understanding certain principles of the universe, whereas messing with genetics is much more complicated, right? That said, they cloned Dolly the sheep in the 90s. Could they have human cloning now? Yeah. Can they age it? I don't know. The point is that you have this situation where some of these people are clearly being replaced. And I forgot why I was bringing that up. But I'm going to go back to this situation in the Middle East being so complicated. Oh, yeah, Yuval Noah Harari. So he's there in Israel trying to what looks like create a color revolution, much like Soros did in Ukraine. That led to the beginning of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, eventually led to the back and forth with Israel and NATO that now has erupted into outright war, as each side tried to put their puppet guy in place. And eventually, like you had the Maidan massacre and putsch by the U.S. and the neo-Nazis, right? And then you get Zelensky in power, and then you have the current nightmare that's happening in Ukraine. So, gosh, what was I going to say? That the Netanyahu saying that thing about Bush is just nutty to me. And Bibi seems like he's like a cold, calculating psychopath as always. And yet it's odd to me. Why are the globalists like angry with Netanyahu? Is it because Netanyahu is wanting to pursue the national interests of Israel and the globalists don't like that because that somehow interferes with their plan? Regardless, Peter Zehan has been saying that he thinks that dock is meant to piss off the Israelis so we can pivot over to Turkey as an ally. That makes a lot of sense to me because from a geopolitical point of view, Turkey controls the Bosphorus Strait and therefore the entire Black Sea. And up in Crimea, you have Sevastopol. And Sevastopol in Crimea is the biggest warm water naval base that the Russians own. But it's on the Black Sea. And the Black Sea has this tremendous choke point. They're at the Dardanelles with the both sides of Istanbul are built around that. And the reason that there's been so many empires covet that city is because it sits on either side of this very narrow point that then opens up into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And if you control that little point, you control the Black Sea, and you also are able to project quite a bit of power into the Mediterranean and certainly into the Arabic Peninsula, which is exactly how you got the Ottoman Empire. So if you're Molochian and you're wanting to control things, and maybe you're wanting to be even more oppressive than you have been in the past, but also try to hide what you're doing a bit, you might want to do it through Islam rather than through the one Jewish state. In many ways, Israel has acted as a land-bound aircraft carrier for the United States and has allowed the United States to project power into the Arabic Peninsula. But it's obviously been a very fraught situation because very often Israel gets a little out of hand and the Arab world starts getting inflamed and the U.S. is like, whoa, we need the oil to be flowing, bro. We need the oil to keep flowing because we got the petrodollar, right? That's bigger than Israel. That's a lot bigger than Israel. And so when Israel is doing things that jeopardizes that, it's a problem for the controllers of the planet. It's weird to think, and I'm certainly not saying, oh, yay, Zionists and Netanyahu. I'm also not saying I'm against, like the existence of Israel. I think it's a very, very complicated thing. There's certainly been like terrible oppression that's happened, but Israel has also existed now for a very long time, and it's kind of hard to get the genie back into the bottle. Like talks of oh, we can't have an Israel at all and just back to Palestine, to me is just as scary or wrong in its own way as like what this, thing where they're trying to get rid of any non-Ashkenazi Israelis, any non-Jews there, an ethno state. I mean, that is obviously like has a dark history, generally speaking. The flip side of the coin is, look what's happening in Europe with the forced immigration. Do Europeans deserve to have an area that is like has been historically filled with white people? And again, Israel, it's different. My point is just that it's complicated. It's difficult to really come down in any kind of position that isn't kind of fraught, unless you're just saying, hey, people, please stop killing each other, which is my general point of view on that. So in the midst of all of this, to where it looked like Netanyahu was going to get kicked out by street riots because he was trying to pack the Supreme Court, all of a sudden Netanyahu backs off of that. And in 2 weeks, he has a trial. And so the what looked like the incipient CIA coup or Soros color revolution kind of fades away. And then October 7th happens. And then Netanyahu goes right back to trying to pack the court and doing all this stuff, and basically uses the emergency of October 7th in order to push through a bunch of policies that he wanted to do. Well, all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, there's been real lack of support for Israel compared to the lockstep support of the past. Now it's starting to come back in Canada and elsewhere. It seems almost like people got the tap on the shoulder that they're going to go pro-Israel again for a little while as well. But it's really worth paying attention to this potential pivot of the United States over to supporting Turkey and using Turkey as their main vector of power to project power into the Middle East. And really, the U.S. is just the military branch of the Venetian black nobility, right? So their ability to project power through Israel is very complicated right now. So you have this super desperate Netanyahu, and in the backdrop of that, Netanyahu needing a distraction, all of a sudden the Iranian president's plane goes down way up in northern Iran in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, right near the Azerbaijani border, which is kind of a risky area to be, right? It would be kind of like Biden, going out for a photo op along the southern U.S. border, right? But somehow without any real security support. Well, the transponder in the helicopter was off or missing. And they're trying to say oh, well, that's an example. Like the Iranians are saying, oh, this is the U.S. fault because we've done an embargo for years ever since the Iranian Revolution. And so their helicopters from the 70s and stuff. There's some truth to that. But I also feel like it's a little odd that of the 3 helicopters that were in this helicopter entourage, it was just the one with the president that went down. Normally, I would say when I see a president of a country dying and being assassinated, I would say 7 times out of 10, it's an inside job. Where that isn't true is when it's an enemy of sort of the Molochian hive mind, in which case I think the odds soar dramatically. However, it's put Iran in a curious position because let's say that the president was assassinated by someone. What do you do with that? If you make a public announcement about that, you have to go to war or your own people are going to overthrow you. It puts you in quite a pickle. So this whole soft play of blaming the Americans for doing the embargo is a good idea, but it's just odd. It's just odd to me. Could it be an accident? Maybe, but boy, the timing of it is awfully suspicious. Okay, I'm going to switch gears in a major way once again. All right, so so it was Turkey that said the helicopter carrying Iran's race did not emit transponder signal and adds that a Turkish drone was used to find the wreckage. So Turkey was very interested in this because it's happening in that whole Azerbaijan area where Turkey's been fighting a proxy war through Azerbaijan against Armenia, right? So very interesting. And then again, you see Turkey in the mix here is right there first on the scene to see what's going on. Very interesting. Turkey definitely becoming much more relevant from a geopolitical place than it's been basically since the 60s and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, so the U.S. House passes a bill banning the Federal Reserve from issuing a CBDC. Whether it's going to make it in the Senate or not is really unclear. It seems likely that the Senate would kill it, but still, that is an amazing, amazing, amazing thing to see that it made it through the House, which I understand is Republican controlled, but to ban the Federal Reserve from issuing a CBDC. The reason I like that is it shows me that a huge number of people are aware of what's up with the CBDC and that there would be significant resistance. They couldn't get the CBDC to work in Nigeria, for God's sake. And you can say that in Nigeria, it's a little bit harder because they don't have the infrastructure and the people don't have as much to lose by ignoring these things. In America, people are softer and whatever. Maybe, but this shows that there's a huge resistance to CBDCs that's fairly organized and fairly significant. And let's be real, even if all the constituents of those people, all the Republicans, unless they were absolutely adamant against the CBDC, which could be the case, what it implies to me is that powerful people are against CBDCs, which is really good news. Wealthy people who were able to influence the Republican Party, and some amount of Democrats, I would imagine, oppose CBDCs. This is fantastic and wonderful news, and is something I think that's worth noting. In a very similar note, and in fact, I like this article here by Decrypt magazine. It says, House passes anti-CBDC bill to prevent Chinese-style surveillance of America. And so this one had a little less Democrat support than some of the other crypto bills. And that brings me to the next point. The House passed a bill outlining new framework for crypto regulation despite SEC pushback. That's interesting because I see this upcoming financial system, which again, I want to be clear, I've never tried to say is some kind of liberating system for humanity and wonderful thing. I just think that this blockchain-based system seems inevitable, and there's a much more open version and there's a much more horrific version, and I prefer the much more open version, right? And also I think that there's a lot of cloak and dagger about what the final system is going to be. So I think that that's very interesting and worth noting, and paying attention to both the anti-CBDC movement and the crypto regulations is really, really worth noting. Okay, Germany. I don't know if I have any German watchers, viewers on my channel, but if I do, first of all, props to you for surviving what you poor German people have had to go through the last 15 or so years. You know, you guys have done well economically, but in every other way, it's abominable what's been happening in Germany. But this really takes the cake. So I guess for a long time, child harm videos were, or children who were lacking garments, right? I'm trying to avoid triggering the algorithm by talking about these things, because of course people who are pro these things can talk about all they want, but people who are anti have to be careful. So apparently it was legal for a long time in Germany, and just a few years ago they made it criminal felony, and they had a year in prison with it. I don't understand how it wasn't illegal before then. I guess it was just like always dealt with, but wasn't like the laws around it weren't clear or something. I was absolutely gobsmacked to find out that it was like only somewhat recently that they did it. Let me see what it is. It was first classified as a crime, the possession of child abuse materials, right? It was first classified as a crime, according to this article, which blows my mind, in 2021, after the federal justice minister, Christine Lambrecht of the Social Democratic Party, introduced a minimum sentence of 1 year for the offense. And it was then classified as a felony. Well, it's just been decreased to basically the equivalent of a misdemeanor and like 6 months in prison and get out right away. What the heck is going on, Germany? Like, first of all, 2021, y'all didn't have a law for that previously? Dear mein Gott, dare I say. That I was researching this because I thought it was very recently they were dialing back the laws, which did just happen. But I thought that it was a new movement, right? Like this new thing, and like some pro-pedo groups in Germany were hailing it as this great victory, and they're also trying to lower the age of consent to 12 years. And that same group that helped get this law passed. But in my research to learn more about it, I discovered to my horror that Germany apparently didn't have a law before 2021. I don't know how that's possible. there's maybe more to that story. So I'll just say it's from redux.info, which is a feminist news and opinion of all things. Funny that I'd be reading that on this channel, but that they had a pretty good article about it. I was just kind of shocked about it. I also think that it's interesting how they say politics makes strange bedfellows, how suddenly you start seeing feminists who are, so-called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, right? All of a sudden they're like kind of going, maybe we do kind of support some degree of old school thinking, or at least we need to have women have women's spaces, right? Which is something that both the right and the left used to agree on. And so it's funny when you see things like that, where like you'll see gays against groomers has been shadow banned or banned on Twitter and Instagram a lot. It's run by this lesbian woman who's against all the pedo stuff that's being pushed in schools. So it's interesting the way that this extreme pushing of the envelope with all these absolutely insane things is causing a reaction and causing people who otherwise didn't appear to be allies to suddenly start, humming the same tune. So that's the good news about it. Meanwhile, also in Germany, they made it legal for their domestic spy agency, which I assume is the equivalent of the FBI, to spy on the German political party, the AfD, which, by the way, is the second most popular party in Germany. What? The German court ruled that they could frickin' spy on that party. And now, to even go even further, Germany is pursuing a total ban on this AfD party, which is like something rather for Deutschland, I think is what it stands for. And basically, they're saying that they don't want, they're like an anti-EU party in Germany that wants to pursue German independence. And they're trying to ban that party outright. I just am like, dang. And so last thing I want to say about Germany is on a potentially related note. Last time things were kind of this venal and corrupt in Germany, I would say, was during the Weimar Republic. And there was a historical event during the 30s that I had always just not thought about very much. I'd always heard, there was a bunch of burning of the books. And it was in the milieu of Kristallnacht, which is horrible, right? Breaking German Jewish shopkeepers' windows and stuff like that. And certain other things that led then to all the atrocities that were committed against Jewish people in Germany, which I think is true, obviously. But I would hear, they burned the books. And I was like, yeah, they burned the books. And yeah, what books? They were books by Jewish intellectuals just because they were Jewish. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, Jewish intellectuals just because they were Jewish. Well, I went and I saw this video and verified it. When you look at what the majority of those books were that were being burned, it was a few different things. It was books on communism and Bolshevism, which, yes, were written by Jewish people, right? Because, again, the Bolsheviks was primarily most of the intellectuals of the Bolshevik movement in Russia were Russian Jews, right? So, of course, Bolshevism would be often written by Jewish intellectuals. Not surprising. Books on communism. And then a lot of books by a specific like sexologist or something who also was Jewish, who was pushing trans and pedo stuff. And that was the majority of what was getting burned. Not like just random, beautiful books about Judaism, or just random, a Jewish author wrote a book about a crime mystery novel, or like Jewish person had some scientific breakthrough, or art that was being suppressed. It wasn't anything like that. It was very specific, extreme political ideology stuff that was being burned. I'm not necessarily saying that makes it okay. I'm just saying the context on that is very interesting, especially given this thing of where Germany is apparently reducing charges once again for harm of Epstein-style harm of children videos and the possession of those. So I don't know. I don't think that some kind of insane reactionary movement to what's happening in Germany is the answer. But I'm also like, I'm worried when you see figures like Geert Wilders, okay, kind of like bit, he's hard right, blah, blah, blah. You see Meloni in Italy. You see Milei in Argentina, who, by the way, had the first budget surplus in like 17 years in Argentina. So you got to give a tip of the hat for that. A lot of what they're doing, I think, is reasonable, and I agree with it. But my concern is if these Molochians continue to push the pendulum so far in that direction of the extreme leftist stuff, I do worry about a violent and unfocused right-wing reactionary movement that could see a lot of people get harmed, much like happened in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. And so I think it's important that we understand what was happening back then in order to understand what's happening now and to prevent any kind of like terrible atrocities from happening again, even if, certain things seem inevitable to me at this point. For example, mass arrests, right? Like reining in any kind of reactionary nationalist movement here in the United States and keeping it from getting, violent and repressive in its own right, to where it's harming people who are not involved with any kind of like political ideology, trying to pass things that are harmful to society, whatever, but people are just innocent people. I think that's something that we have to be aware of, even if we're like, wow, this globalist stuff is evil. It certainly is. I think we have to be careful about making sure that we're reasonable and measured in our response to all of that. Okay, well, wow, I got through that insanely fast. I had all these notes, and I thought that it would take me a lot longer to get through it than it did. And so maybe I will have a little more in the tank after this as well. Maybe I don't want to go more than 90 minutes, but now I can definitely do that. And what I'm going to do in the second half is, if people want to ask me questions, they have, but I would like to hear, I'm going to go on break here real quick. I'd like to hear people's thoughts on, just throwing one out there, what do you think happened to the Iranian president? Was it an accident? If not, who did it? Who do you think? So I'm going to put that up. And so accident or intentional? If the latter, who done it? Right? And then I'm going to ask some other questions about some of the stuff that were on here. And if anyone has any additional information, like on the bizarreness of that bill that I'm reading about in Germany, could be like someone's like going through Google Translate. I just saw it all over the place. And at first, my first reading of it made it sound like it was just a very recent thing where they had rolled back these laws, but I thought these were laws that existed for decades, presumably. And so I haven't gone super deep into that. So if people know more about Germany and want to put information up, that's great. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take a break here, and then I'll come back. And in the second half, we will launch into some Q&A. All right. I'll see you here in a second. And I'm going to put that question up so that way people can answer it. All right. Yeah, well, hopefully people know I'm on. All right, and we're back. So I'm really curious. Like I said, we are going to in the second half here do a little reverse Q&A where I am going to ask you guys about questions. Although if some people have questions, maybe I'll answer some. So I'm curious what people said. You think media, Hollywood, Netflix has more influence on people than in books? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But there was a time when books were all important, and I actually still think they're extremely important even now. Just a huge amount of the stuff that I know, I don't think I could have learned it any other way than from reading it in a book. Could it have been the Lucys who wasted the Iranian president? Sure, that would be interesting. I mean, he was, people call him the Butcher of Tehran or whatever. I mean, he's, it's not like this was some kind of like, freedom, not freedom fighter. That's a bad term. This guy was no, I'm trying to think of like a good example. He was no Marcus Aurelius, right? Some benevolent leader, right? He was super dark and very repressive. So, yeah, I think I suppose it's possible. I don't see why they would want to do that if they're trying to avoid war, right? I feel more like the Lucys were somehow able to tamp it down and keep it from going to war. I mean, honestly, it could have been the Iranians themselves because the lack of reaction is interesting to me. It's been almost a week now. The Iranians do often take quite a bit of time, but they haven't even really said anything. There hasn't been any rhetoric. It's just very puzzling. Like, did the Ayatollahs off him because he was gaining too much power and like he was starting to push back against the Ayatollahs? Like, it's hard to know. All right. Could be either, to be honest. Definitely. Fact is, Western press is going apeshit on white male air pilots since Iranian president's death. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? I haven't. They're saying white male pilots are bad somehow. I mean, what isn't caused by white men doing whatever bad thing, right? But airline pilots, I hadn't heard. I'm not saying it wrong. I just haven't heard that. And if I'm scrunching my eyes, I'm just like, man, these people, they just won't stop. They're like any narrative cramming into white men are to blame. A bunch of black women beat a bunch of Korean women to death, and it's, of course, white patriarchy's fault. What? So my intuition says Lucy's, but yeah. Interesting. That's interesting. I'd have to think about, like, why that would be. I'm not saying you're wrong. I would have to think about, like, what their goal would be in that. Iranian president, all weather data from the date the helicopter went down was removed. Assumption equals do was used, a directed energy weapon. That's interesting. The only reason I can imagine they would do that is if they wanted to send a message of like intimidation by using a directed energy weapon to assassinate a leader, and all the powerful people were therefore told it was a directed energy weapon, but for the plebs, it was an accident or just an old school assassination. That could be. There's no reason to use a do if the point is just to kill him. The only reason you use a do is the same reason they did the second nuclear bomb, to intimidate Stalin. So as an intimidation flex with a powerful technology, that I could see. I don't see why it's necessary. On the flip side, it's weird to me that they used them in Lahaina pretty clearly, and then again in Peru some months later. So it's interesting to consider. I haven't heard anything about do, though. Personally, I believe it's absolutely an inside job because of who else the supreme leader would choose. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me that it was an inside job because 9 out of 10 assassinations are. If this had happened in almost any other country but Iran, Russia, or China, or some country that the U.S. was leaning on for resources, like some African nation, I would assume that it was an inside job. And usually, like, even outside jobs require some amount of inside job, meaning that it's pretty hard to get at these leaders unless you have paid off the security staff. Perfect time for deflecting blame. Yeah, that also puts the country in a bit of mourning. So I feel like they have bad inflation in Iran, just like everywhere else. There's a lot of reasons they might do it. that's the least sexy option. The timing of it certainly is odd, and they might have even done it to try and muddy the waters. That was it Israel, or whatever. Which the timing of it's just really crazy. No matter who did it, the timing is wild. Plus the BRICS, yeah. A timeline change is usually followed by a death or removal of politicians. Example, Georgia Guidestones blown up on July 6, 2022, followed by Shinzo Abe killed July 8, 2022. Yeah, that is interesting. What do you mean by timeline change, Alex? The Georgia Guidestones being blown up was definitely like a message being sent. I think actually by the Luciferians to the Molochians saying we're not going to do that. That whole 500 million thing ain't going to happen. And so they blew it up to send a message, I think. Go books, absolutely. So how many politicians have been killed? There was that PM in Eastern Europe shot. Yeah, that also is interesting. And that guy was he was pro peace in Ukraine, facilitated by giving basically the Donbass and most of Eastern Ukraine to Russia, including Crimea, like officially. That was what he was lobbying for, was to end the war in Ukraine, which is basically right on the border of Slovakia, and to make sure that that war wound down before it like enveloped Slovakia as well, which is probably smart. And trying to get the Russians to calm down too, not a bad idea if you live there in Slovakia, and yet he gets shot by some EU globalist. Not that it was like Klaus Schwab himself like rappelled down the line and shot him, but like a regular person who bought into like globalist narratives. So they say. I mean, that guy could have been, who knows, mind controlled. I mean, he was, even if he was radicalized or whatever, he was mind controlled, whether it was a more insidious mind control or just the more basic one of the media vilifying this man for his position. It's hard to say. Yet slip in the monarchy they fought against. Yeah, very interesting. Sorry, I should have read that aloud. Exactly. Blame U.S. or Israel, yet slip in the monarchy they fought against. Yeah. No, not at all. What? No. Interesting question. No, I would say across the board, no. There's a difference, by the way, between Archangel Samael and the Qliphothic Samael. They're two aspects of the same being, kind of like on a pole magnet. I won't say that El goddess's name, but no, Moloch's at the tippy top of power right now, but not for much longer. Tick-tock, Moloch. I think it could have just been bad weather in mountainous area. Yeah, it could have. What the fuck was he doing up there? Like, why would you be way up there in rickety old helicopters? Like, if it was an accident, then like nobody considered that could happen. You're in bad weather in the mountainous area in the middle of nowhere to where rescue is impossible, or will come too late. Like, there just wasn't any risk assessment there. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying like it was a crime by oversight, where people didn't do their job, if that's what happened. So, I mean, it's criminal negligence. There's the term I'm looking for. That's interesting. Could be. You could say that in a certain way. Yeah, I don't really want to delve too deeply into Qliphothic spirits right now. That's just, I don't want to even tap into that energy right now. If you saw Ayatollah Twitter post after the president's death and wonder what the fuck happened between Molochians and Iran, yeah, it's odd. Like, this whole thing is odd. And I do feel like some amount of them, but also like it's weird because if you had asked me like who did I feel was the more reasonable between Shia and Sunni for the past especially since the House of Saud took over in Saudi Arabia, I probably would have said that the Shia were more reasonable. And it is the Shia who's been fighting against, NATO in Syria and elsewhere, the so-called Shia Crescent. So I just think it's complicated. And for sure, like the Ayatollah guy is very, very dark, or not the Ayatollah, but the president butcher of Tehran this very, very dark figure. It gets hard to tell who is like lower Luciferian who can trend upward to middle Luciferian, and who's Molochian and maybe occasionally able to operate in lower Luciferian, upper Molochian energy. It gets difficult to discern, and that's why I sometimes call it the Shadow Wars, because it's happening in that intersection between the two circles, with the higher end of Molochianism and the lower end of Luciferian. It's right in that section where the fight is happening, because what's happening is that lower section of extreme Molochianism is about to be like removed like a tumor from the collective human conscious to a huge degree. And so that means that the battleground is in that hyper ruthless aspect of Luciferianism, the worst impulses of Luciferianism, the darkest. And so it becomes difficult to discern sometimes, where does someone fall out? That's what I was trying to say earlier, like, where do you put Netanyahu? But if Yuval Noah Harari was fighting against them, was it just an internecine conflict between two different Molochian groups? That could actually be the case. It's quite difficult to discern, although it does often seem as a reasonable rule to look at. Nationalists tend to be Luciferian, and the very top-down nasty globalists like the WEF tend to be Molochian in character. Not always, but very often. So it's interesting. I don't believe so. I'm just not. I mean, I'm going to say no, but I actually am not familiar with that. Maybe it's the way you're writing it, but I'm not familiar with that term. I'm not a Mason, and so I don't know the details of 33rd degree Freemasonry. My great grandfather was a 32nd degree Freemason back when that was a big deal, but I don't really know a ton about the inner workings of Masonry, other than the little I've learned from family members or friends who were Masons. That said, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of corruption in the higher echelons of Freemasonry. I mean, that to me is beyond a shadow of a doubt. Does that mean everyone who's in the upper echelons is corrupt? No. There's clearly Luciferians amongst them, and it seems like there's also even some amount of most high people, but the proportions are wildly skewed towards the darker forces, of course. Yeah. That's interesting. It's funny because the archangelic aspect of Samael is actually the most feared opponent of Moloch. So it's interesting. I'm of course aware of the qliphothic aspect, the demonic aspect of that same being. It's a very strange thing. It's the one being that's openly like this. All beings have this quality, this bar magnet quality to their inner nature, but Samael is the only one. Archangel Samael on the one hand and the qliphothic spirit on the other. They're the same being, and they're connected sort of at the bottom almost, if you will, and they have two almost polar opposite aspects to themselves. So it's interesting, but again, I don't want to be dwelling on these lower things. There's tons of channels about this sort of thing, Legion of Lilith, among others. I said the bad word. Oopsies. He was set up for next Supreme Leader. Yeah. Yep. Pretty interesting. Yeah, again, I just don't want to delve into that anymore. Okay, given the historical associations with the German Green Movement and the underage debauchery, do you have any thoughts on deep green resistance's Derek Jensen, also a survivor of abuse? I've heard of Derek Jensen back in the day, but when I was into peak oil, but I would need to have my memory refreshed, and I don't know the answer to that. So, yeah. Banned from Eugene or public library for turf activity because he was supporting trans exclusionary radical feminists, supposedly. Huh. That's interesting. I live not terribly far from Eugene. Could they be killing important figures over the place just to replace them with homunculi for the Great Reset? No, I don't think the Great Reset's gonna work. As I've said many times on this channel, like I'm pretty sure that group is being set up to be undercut by another group that will have a much subtler form of control, global technocracy, rather than a super top-down hyper enslavement system. But that said, there's definitely some weird shit going on with people getting replaced. Okay, let's see here. Will the world become more matriarchal after Moloch loses power? Do you mean will the divine feminine rise? Yes, I would say. Matriarchal implies rule by women and kind of like to the exclusion of men. Will there be more balance between males and females? Yes, I believe that there will. Believe it or not, there are some who say that the Venetian black nobility is run by a female priesthood and a female, like basically witches coven. There's a website called femaleilluminati.com that will trigger your virus. If you have a virus protector on your computer, which you should, it'll trigger it, and you have to like go past a recommendation by Google not to go to it, and also you have to deal with your browser maybe freaking out saying it's virus. But femaleilluminati.com, the person lays a very compelling argument to a secret evil matriarchy that throws regular women under the bus and has a false facade of patriarchy in front of it. I'm not saying it's true, but there's certain things in esoteric circles that point towards the dark divine feminine being worshipped at the center of the darkest of these groups. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's a theory worthy of consideration. I don't see either matriarchy or patriarchy being a thing in the future yugas. I see an increasing ascendance of divine masculine and divine feminine, and probably some degree of polarization among the Luciferians into more dark masculine, dark feminine energy, but of a Luciferian sort rather than a Molochian self-destroying sort. And so I actually see that among the part of society that's moving sort of towards the golden age, right, the people who are evolving most rapidly spiritually, that there'll be an arising of a partnership between the divine feminine and divine masculine rather than a sort of matriarchy to bring balance to the force, if indeed you're of the mainstream opinion that we've lived under patriarchy for the past 6,000 years, which 98%, 99% of the evidence seems to support that thesis. I was offering the counter one just because I think it's worthy of consideration. Yeah, he might be. Oh, that's something I should have talked about on this. Klaus Schwab resigned this week. Was he arrested? Is he dead? I don't know. That's interesting. You said Netanyahu is dead. So you think he's like dead and been replaced, or what? Like, hasn't he given a number of speeches this week? Schwab, I haven't seen in a minute, and he could be dead or arrested. You know, definitely that kind of thing is going on behind the scenes. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of, for whatever reason, people are really like harping on like darker spirits or neutral spirits and stuff, and I'm just not going to be addressing that today. I'm just not feeling it today. Any thoughts on the ongoing beef between Drake and Lamar? Personally, thinking it is king ritual. Well, I haven't kept up super strong on the beef between Drake and Lamar, I have to be honest, and so I don't know. Yeah, interesting. Oh, Heather. Let's see what Heather has to say. Hey, Heather, good to see you. Thoughts on the recent solar flares? Do you feel this is an indicator of the Yuga shift? There have been like mega solar flares. Like I live, near Corvallis, Oregon, and there was, you could see the northern lights, not super clearly, but I could see them, and I've never seen them. It was very disappointing. I wanted to see the cool, like wavy ones, like you see like in extreme Norway or whatever. And I saw like the first time I see northern lights, it's like womp womp with some slight haziness in the distance, right? Some people who are near me who have less light pollution were able to get pretty sweet pictures. And so anyways, of course, northern lights are triggered by, solar flares hitting the Earth's magnetic field. So the solar activity increasing, which seems to be the case, is interesting. But I swear I read a few years ago that they were talking about a Maunder, M-A-U-N-D-E-R, Maunder minimum coming, and that actually solar activity was going to lessen to a great degree soon. But I don't know. I'm of the opinion that the human mind is a transceiver, both a transmitter and a receiver. And I think that all the planets here in our solar systems are also transceivers of certain frequencies and certain spiritual karmic lessons. And that's sort of like the essence of Vedic astrology and reading people's karmas is looking at the way the planets as transceivers. They both transmit, but they also receive. Well, where they receive, I believe the planets receive from the sun, and that the sun transmits to the planets and to the earth, and that the sun is a receiver for the active galactic nucleus, and that from the active galactic nucleus, signals are sent to the sun, which then acts in certain ways and then transmits energies to the different planets here, and then the planets interact with one another. And from our experience here on Earth, we experience like where Saturn is in the sky through the principle of as above, so below. We experience that as the way boundaries and discipline play out in our lives, or other karmic indicators. So it's really interesting. That brings up something I meant to say I should have said in the first half, which is that I have opened up the summer 2024 angelic magic class for people who are interested in learning angelic magic, so that you can learn to better ride the reality wave of this experience of this world, and be able to attract to you circumstances and people who can help you to enjoy all the gifts you have within you, and help you overcome trauma and self-limiting beliefs so you can transform in miraculous ways. And I bring it up because Heather is a former angelic magic student, and she actually has helped me with stuff behind the scenes on the show and is working on a few things. And I'm also considering teaching a Vedic astrology class, and I'm just curious if people would be interested in that. I've sort of like done a very bare bones write-up of what that would look like, but that way you would be able to read your own karmas and the karmas of loved ones and family members. And so if people would be interested in that, just let me know. But if you would like to join the angelic magic class, then just go to whitelotusoflight.com, click on the consultations tab, and then just join the class. I have one for the EU and UK time zone. I have one for Australia, Oceania time zone, and then I have an East Coast US friendly time, which this podcast currently, or live stream, is not East Coast friendly because it's like 12:30 there. So I'm gonna go ahead and like kind of skim through these, and I'm actually gonna, I think, wrap up fairly soonish. I just want to see some of the stuff. My grandfather, and my mother said, was a Freemason too, 33rd degree, who left on his own after things he learned. Funny how the world works. I didn't even know this till very recently myself. Wow, that's really interesting. Did he ever say anything to you about it? I also, like, I don't know, my 32nd degree Freemason great grandfather, he's buried in like a Masonic graveyard and stuff. I don't know. He was going to tell some huge secrets about my family and my grandfather. My grandfather hated him and never went to find out whatever family secret it was. I don't know. Sounds cool, but it might have been a long time ago. Your great-grandfather had sex with a black woman. Scandalous. Like in the 50s, that might have been some great family secret. It's like, what? Good for him, I guess, and good for her. I'm a Freemasonry descendant myself. Also believe I'm here to repair the link to the 11th dimensional Stargate. I recognize this as a stretch, but here I am. Very interesting. That particular goddess has it doesn't super care for me, and I'm pretty protected from Moloch at this point. But she, in the past, gave me excruciating headaches a couple of times, and so I don't play with her. I let her do her own thing. So no, she's not worse, but she doesn't like me talking about her or interacting with her. She really, really doesn't like me. Kundalini awakening would be more common if the divine feminine is more prominent. Oh, Absolutely. Just spiritual awakening in general. I mean, I'm of the opinion that we all need to step into our divine masculine, divine feminine, and bring those energies up and rise together. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about, like, I was having a conversation with a loved one recently about, so I was hiking on a trail and I came around the corner, and I used to get bit all the time by dogs when I was a kid, all the time. And I came around this corner, and here was this gigantic ass, like biggest I've ever seen pit bull. And I was like, oh my God. And I was walking with a friend who is from a foreign country, and they didn't know what a pit bull was. And I said, hey, it's pit bull, right? And they didn't respond and just kept going down the trail like, oh, that's meaningless. But for me, I'm really scared of pit bulls. And so I went all the way off the trail and avoided it. And afterwards I was talking to my friend, and I was like, oh my God, I got so scared. And they were like, why? Because they weren't scared at all, because they don't know about pit bulls or whatever, or maybe they wouldn't be scared anyway. And we had this big, long conversation, and I was like, oh, kids getting hurt, and we need to pass laws and stuff. And I just reminded, my friend's very wise, and I was just reminded, I need to sort of take my own advice and remember that the world is to a huge degree about frequency and vibration, and that mastering that fear within myself of dogs and overcoming that might help lead to changes elsewhere in the world, to where I'm able to approach these things more compassionately. And then people maybe who are abused, like this woman may very well have been abused. She kind of radiated abuse. The woman that had this, that was part of the thing that scared me, is that this woman wasn't a small woman, but she also wasn't, it's not like she was 6'8" and weighed 350, right? I don't know. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say she weighed about 150 pounds, something like that. And when the dog moved ever so slightly, she went, because this dog had to weigh 80 pounds, something like that. It's the biggest pit bull I've ever seen in my life. It was just fucking massive. And when I went behind it further down the trail, it had huge nuts. Like, it was surging with testosterone. But the point is that I was coming from a place of fear and limitation. And I was realizing that I just need to take my own advice and look at it. Because, I talk a lot in this channel about my understanding of all these esoteric principles and sort of like this process I've been through of healing my traumas and so forth. But I don't ever want people to think that I'm like, oh, wow, I'm super enlightened and I'm just have totally figured it all out, because I forget all the time these principles when the day-to-day stresses of life cause my hypervigilance and my trauma background to go and get triggered. And so I just want to remind you all that, yes, the divine feminine needs to be more prominent. So does the divine masculine. Men need to step into that. Women need to step into the divine feminine. And men need to be divine masculine protectors to create a safe space to where women feel safe enough to open up as the divine feminine and have certain of their needs met, just like they then will automatically help to meet the needs of the divine masculine. Like, it's an interplay. It's a mix. And part of that is working through our fear and trauma and self-limiting beliefs. It's just so important. I also had a thing where I thought I was going to go through this super grueling process, and I'm a little light on money right now, and I was really worried because I had to prove to my real estate people that I made triple the income, and that they had previously made me give a full year tax return, all this kind of stuff. And this time, with minimal financial background checking, they gave me the lease. They allowed me to re-sign the lease with no increase in price. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And I have these little miracles happen all around me all the time, and yet I still sometimes forget these principles. And so stepping into the divine feminine, stepping into the divine masculine, it really is miraculous the way doing these things and healing your trauma and stepping out of these self-limiting beliefs will just miraculously change the world around you. And it's important that we remember it when we get caught up in all this stuff about what's going on in the external world and this big power struggle. It's important to remember that the core of who we are and our experience in this world is really based in the spiritual place. So let's see here. There's just a few more here. Kelly MC, what's up? I caught this an hour in. Darn it. I'm going back to the start. See you in the next one. No worries whatsoever. Good to see you, Kelly. Has Kate Middleton been replaced with an animatronic like in Disney's It's a Small World ride? That feels really unfair to the It's a Small World ride, which, by the way, is the most nightmarish thing ever. You go through, I'm pretty sure they've gotten rid of this monstrosity, which is hands down, like, if I had to point to where Nazi mind control went after World War II, where they took the most diabolically fiendish Nazi scientists, they were brought to the Disneyland campus to create the It's a Small World ride to psychologically break forever everyone who is in the It's a Small World ride. Because, man, you'd go in that thing and you'd be like, oh, it's a small world after all, and they're Dutch. Oh, now they're Chinese. That's cute. Oh, there's some Inuit people. Okay. Oh, there's also some German people doing it now. Okay. It's starting to get a little tedious. Okay, Russians. Right, Russians. Okay, Brazilian. Okay. Wow, Spain's up to bat. Greece. And it just... every single version of all they had on was different costumes, and they're moving back and forth saying, it's a small world after all. And you're stuck in this ride and literally strapped in that goes like half a mile per hour. And it goes on seemingly forever and ever and ever and ever. And by the end, you are just not the same person. And a big part of you wants to go back and do the humanitarian thing and warn everyone, like a stark raving mad doomsday prophet, do not get on this ride for your sake, for the sake of your children and your children's children, as the epigenetic trauma of this ride doubtless washes down like an unholy deluge from an evil river, an evil dam that has burst to wipe out the populace. Such is the horror of this ride. But instead, what we all do is we all slinked away in cowardice, shaken and broken, no longer the same after being on the It's a Small World ride. And yes, that is how strongly I feel about the sheer horror that is the It's a Small World ride at Disneyland, which I've unfortunately been on, and I will never have that 20 minutes of soul-searing trauma part of my life. I'm finally ready to talk about this publicly. Where the Nazis actually trying to overthrow the Molochians. Gosh. You know, it's a great question. It's been on my mind a lot recently. Again, it comes down to that shadow wars happening in that dark Luciferian, right? I don't know the answer to this anymore. But when I watch this thing by Jason Rice on Robert Sephir's channel about Antarctica, it came out at the beginning of the year. It's the single most important video of the year, in my opinion. Go watch it. Jason Rice. Antarctica on Robert Sephir came out probably early February, maybe late January of this year on Robert Sephir's channel. Just go down until you find Antarctica. And it would have been about 5 months ago, I'm guessing 4 months ago. In that video, Jason Rice, when he described the post-war Antarctic Germans, right? Everything he described to me suddenly was like the giant missing puzzle piece of what tied together all sorts of events that had made no sense to me for the past 70 years, all snapped into focus when I watched that. And his description of the post-war Antarctic Germans, who he claimed were now spacefaring in a big, big way, and had penetrated the cabinets of every country on Earth and had penetrated all the corporate boardrooms of every major corporation on Earth. This was Jason Rice's claim. It sounded eerily like what the angels had described, the Luciferian force that was mounting and was about to overthrow the old Molochian system. Boy, did it seem to match what Jason Rice said about the Antarctic Germans, or the Nazi International, as Joseph Farrell talks about. So I don't know, but that is a hot and super controversial topic, and I'm not 100% on where to come down on that. But they do seem to be darker Luciferian was their resting consciousness, which meant they went down into full-blown Molochianism, and maybe sometimes might have tipped up out of the lower ebb of Luciferianism into the more reasonable Luciferian. But yeah, very, very strange. And for sure, we've been lied to about Sorry, I saw an insane comment that I'm going to have to comment on here in a second. Kind of blew my mind. I think it's important to recognize that we've been massively lied to about World War II, but then not get all crazy and off the deep end and then try and flip the script and say, no. It turns out, my big problem with World War II is they always try and say that it's the one war where there was clear good guys, right? Or maybe there's been 3 in American history, according to, if you're in America, you'd understand this. The Revolutionary War, we were the good guys. I actually agree with that. The Civil War, that the North was the good guys, I'm a little less clear on that one. And then World War II, we were definitely the good guys and the Germans were definitely 100% bad. When you look at history and you look at wars, like, it's almost never really good guys, unless it's like someone's lived there for a long ass time and someone comes in and tries to attack them and then the people push them out. Like, you could describe Haile Selassie resisting the Italians' attempt at colonization during World War II. You could perhaps say that was like a just and good war because the Ethiopians and Haile Selassie were defending themselves, right? And I think you can make a strong argument there. Most wars are not that way. Most wars are much less clear, much more murky. And World War II, I think, was murkier than most, as opposed to being as clear-cut as the victors of World War II would like us to believe. All right, I got to talk about this because what in the world are you talking about, bro? Too much semen pretension in Corvallis, to be honest? Do you mean retention? Pretension? What, there's like a lot of like snobbish seamen in Corvallis that are like, yes, I dare say, not ready to be blown in the load this week. No, it'll have to be a proper Victorian-era pornographic pamphlet for me to be shot out. Like, what do you mean, semen pretension? Dragon gets bit frequently by dogs. Well, surprise, surprise. Yeah, no, I'm scared of. Thank you for backing me up in my dog phobia, Alex. And now I can use that, and I'm sure people in my life will groan upon hearing this. Fear passes to dogs, and bigger dogs can transmute that into anger because you confuse them with your fear since there shouldn't be any threat. Yeah, bro, that's the worst part about it is like my conscious brain's like, don't get afraid. And then this other part of my brain's like, bro, you're already afraid of the dog. And I'm like, shut up, I know. And it's like, but you can't be afraid, bro. And I'm like, I'm trying to relax, brain. And my brain's like, but bro, if you don't relax right away, the dog will start to think you're bad. And by this point, my fear is just accelerating and rising and starting to go into a supernova state. It's horrifying. It's so horrible. And yes, I need to figure out a way to transmute this clearly. All right. I'm just going to skip a few of these. Best description of the hellish ride ever. I took that never-ending monstrosity. Isn't that insane? Like, it lasts so far beyond your worst nightmares of how long it will last. Like, shout out to fellow survivors of It's a Small World ride on Disneyland. It's something to where, like, someday, now that ride has been relegated to the dustbin of history, praise be the Most High, like, I feel like there should be a survivors group where we come together like Vietnam vets, and other people are like, what's this? All these glum people talking about It's a Small World. You wouldn't understand, man, with their cigarette. You wouldn't understand. You weren't there. Because truly, you would not understand the horror of the It's a Small World ride unless you've been through it. Because no depiction of it is accurate, because you know why? You can always turn it off. You're not stuck in a depiction. You always have the choice to get out. Literally, I was trying to get out. I was trying to get the strap out. I was looking and I was seeing that the ground was right near me and that I could theoretically get out of this slow 1 mile per hour ride. And I was really wanting to do it. I was really just wanting to get out and just run. And at the end, I actually saw an adult man get out and just start walking. And I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. My mom's like, yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. And I was like, I'm getting down. So, yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's difficult to know. A reincarnation of Krishna. Whoa, I have never heard that. That's wild to me. Okay. I think we're just about, oh my God, I thought we were close to just about done. Windhammer, love the name, love the Futhark rune there. I'm pretty sure I've seen you before because we talked about the rose thorn Futhark symbol there. The U.S. is definitely on the wrong side in World War II. Everything Uncle A warned about has come to pass. Yeah, well, I mean, it didn't take some people, 80 years of retrospective, seeing what's unfolded since to come to that conclusion. General Patton said exactly that right after World War II, and in fact died under very mysterious circumstances. I should say he spoke about it during the waning days of World War II, and then it seems like was assassinated. He also was part of the group. He made a beeline to where the Die Glocke had been kept and worked on. Into the SS high-tech facilities. Like Patton was one of the main people, one of the first people to get there, and saw he was the ranking person on the scene. He got to see ? Maybe that's why he was killed. Interesting. Let's see. Oh my. So this is a lot of, there's a lot more stuff. I'm going to try and hit some of the people I haven't seen as much, like Jessica. So weird. I'm terrified of anything Egyptian. Is this past life stuff? Very possibly. Very possibly. I'm going to be putting up a conversation with a friend of mine named Juliana Cabrera. She's very young, but she's this like unbelievable savant, like psychically, and she's on the short list. There's it's funny. I've met two of them in the past 4 years, and the other were many years ago. But I met two in the past 4 years. One just this year. And got to know her quite well, who's the moderator on the channel, Elle. She's in this category. And then Juliana I've known for about 4 years. We met in 2021 or 2020 maybe. And I think we met maybe like late 2020. And anyways, she's super psychic, and she does something called QHHT, that lets you go back and experience past lives and often do a lot of healing around them. And people a lot of times ask on the channel, well, how do you deal with past life trauma? Because that does come up at time. Well, I can sometimes help people with that. But what's amazing about what Juliana does, and we're going to talk about it in the conversation, is that she goes right to those past lives and help heal them. So, maybe it's coming out in the next probably 10 days or so. Juliana Cabrera and I talking, so quite interesting. Wow, okay, I think I'm just about caught up. So, yeah, some people hold this belief. I do not. I see Christ as, my Catholic training kicked in. I was like the only begotten Son of God, right? Like immediately kicked in. Couldn't even help it. Just Catholic schoolboy for years. I see Christ as sort of an avatar of the Most High. He's a solar avatar, it seems pretty clearly from an archetypal point of view. He seemed to train with all sorts of different mystical groups like the Essene. It seems certain Isis mystery schools in Egypt that were very positive, divine, feminine, and Mary Magdalene seems to have also been involved in that. This is just based on tons of stuff, and not everyone's going to agree with me. You can never talk about Jesus and get any kind of agreement on it. And then I think, he went on a trip in the last years. He went as far east as perhaps Nepal even. He certainly made it to India at a minimum. Then he came back and was just like this supercharged, like super incredible yogi mystic with all these powers. But the main thing was he'd attained Christos consciousness, right? The Yeshua had gained Christos consciousness, and that he then was able to emit this most high frequency and vibration. And it's the true light, whereas Lucifer is the false light. This is just my belief, and what I talk about a lot in this channel when I talk about that triplicity between Molochian consciousness, Luciferian consciousness, and most high consciousness. So I do know that some people hold that. It's not my belief. All right, take care, Howard. Have a good one, brother. I would say communism is. I think it's going to be knocked back in a big, big way. It's being intentionally spread as a as a political weapon right now, but I think it's going to collapse. I mean, you could say the same thing about pedo or WEF or whatever. You have to look at it carefully, and you'll see that the wheels are coming off the cart on a lot of these things. Believe me, I'm no fan of the so-called religion of peace. I mean, I think there's Islamic people who are beautiful, spiritual, wonderful, super sacred, incredible human beings. Of course there are. And there's tons of people who are just normal people who happen to have been born in Muslim countries. That said, some of the tenets of Islam and also like the Babylonian Talmud and Judaism, I have a real problem with. And think are very problematic and need to be massively reformed at best. Like, I think the Babylonian Talmud should be seen as a barbarous historical relic that can be looked upon merely as a historical curiosity of an ancient, nightmarish ideology. And I think Islam, unfortunately, has a lot of similar, very negative attributes to it. And I think some of this is that Molochian force has captured those Abrahamic faiths at the top and has really corrupted the teachings of all three. And so I'm going to wrap up here super, super quick, next 5 minutes or so. Let's see. Seems to be probably last-ditch effort of that dying force. That's what I think as well. No, it's going to get turned back. They don't. The only thing they have is oil and some amount of money in Dubai, but they just don't really have any power or ability to project power. Turkey is by far the strongest Islamic country, and it'll be arrested before it gets any more out of hand, in my opinion. I actually see a huge anti-Islamic reaction, anti-Jewish and anti-Islamic reaction that's in the process of forming. So Europe's about to have a huge anti-Islamic purge, I think, and you're seeing that in figures like Millet and elsewhere, and it's going to spread. Or not Millet, Geert Wilders, and it's going to spread. I'm just going to actually skip that one. Yes, I did. I talked about that earlier in the stream, you have to look at big picture in decades in the future. Yeah, exactly. QHHT, what's the best source to deport dive? I'm not an expert in this at all. My friend Juliana is, and like I said, it's going to come out in the next week or so, and she mentions like who it comes from and so forth, and her experience with it. So we'll be talking about that, and you could probably ask Juliana directly. Her website is In Divine Timing, I think it's called, In Divine Timing on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, she's amazing. I love Juliana. She's awesome. Hope you're right, bro. It's such a dangerous call. Yep. Sorry, deep dive, not deport. Yeah, I knew what you meant. Okay, well, that looks like a great place to wrap it up and getting in the 90-minute mark. So much love, everyone. Oh, I do want to say someone gave me a super sticker, fly over me. Thank you so much, brother or sister. Super appreciate you. I also want to say, for anyone interested, angelic magic class, sign up on whitelotusoflight.com and /consultations. And so anyone who's interested in that can go in there and you can register now for the July class. It starts in July. I think it's July 11th is the first day. All the details are there. And I also want to announce there's going to be some changes pretty soon to Patreon and how some of the content creation works on this channel. I'm getting a lot of help sort of retooling and reorganizing White Lotus of Light. There's also going to be White Lotus of Light swag pretty soon. I'm going to get a hoodie that I'm very excited about. So hoodies and T-shirts and hats, that kind of thing. So anyways, all right, much love, everyone. And I will catch you on the flip side. All right, bye-bye. Take care.